Hello, and this time on the Mortgage and Protection Podcast, we have Paul back from Henchurch Lane to continue the conversation on mortgages for nurses. Welcome back, Paul. Are you ready to answer some more questions?
Ready as ever, Tessa. Let's do it.
Okay, here we go. So, people would also like to know, can self employed nurses apply for a mortgage? How does that work?
Yeah, they can. It is slightly different than part one, where we went through mainly on the employed side of things. So,
Mm,
self-employed nurses generally you'll tend to find they might be a part of an agency, or they could even be running their own limited company. The difference there is they're going to need to provide self-employed documentation, so things like accounts and tax returns rather than payslips.
mm.
Outside of that, it's generally the same.
Okay. Well, that's good news to start off with, but hopefully that's useful. Again, if we've got anyone self employed watching this or listening to this episode. So, we're going to add some more layers now. Can I get a buy to let mortgage as a nurse?
Yeah. So being a nurse doesn't restrict access to the buy-to-let market side of things. In fact, most buy-to-let lending decisions, they're going to be based more on the rental, the expected rental income of that property rather than the actual borrower's salary.
Hmm.
Um, some lenders are going to have minimum income requirements for buy-to-lets, but the loan that you get on that property is going to be driven by the rental income or the rental potential, not the personal salary. So that's worth
Hmm.
noting.
Right, okay. So that explains it if you are looking into a buy to let property. Now, we get this question a lot, but in this case, what if I have bad credit and I'm a nurse looking to get a mortgage? So, how does that affect the overall process?
So bad credit can mean many things. Sometimes people miss a couple of payments and they think they've got bad credit. But
Hmm.
anything with bad credit is just really going to determine where your research lies. So make a mortgage impossible. It really depends on what the credit issue was. How long ago it happened is a big factor, and whether it's being resolved now as well. So they're the sort of three things that really dictate what the likely outcome is going to be.
Hmm.
There are lenders in the UK that can help you when you've got previous credit issues, but
Hmm.
that might mean that the rates and the deposit requirements can sometimes be a bit higher.
Hmm. Okay, so three key pointers there then to take away from the episode. But hopefully, as well, in some way, that does sound reassuring if you're listening to this, watching this, and you do
Yeah.
have bad credit. Right, let's move on then to this question. So, are there any specific incentives or discounts available for nurses when obtaining a mortgage? We might have covered this slightly on our part one episode, actually.
Yeah,
Hmm.
we touched on it. So yeah, occasionally there can be key worker schemes or regional initiatives, but they're not sort of widespread across the UK mortgage market, I'd say.
Hmm.
And if you're not watching it right now, that they change all the time as well. So worth having a chat with your broker to see if there's anything specifically for you in that area potentially.
Hmm.
But again, the biggest benefit is going to come from having somebody understand what lenders are going to treat that nursing income most favorably rather than a specific discount. And to give you a little bit of an example here, you might have a
Hmm.
lender who says, for key workers, we're going to give you a bigger multiple, so maybe 5.5 times your income instead of their usual five. Now, that sounds like a great incentive for nurses, but
Hmm.
if you look at the wider market, there could quite easily be someone who's not offering a nurse incentive at all that gives you six times your income. So
Hmm.
it's just worth bearing in mind. It's worth looking at the bigger picture.
Yes, definitely, and makes sense there. And sorry if you saw me hit my microphone throughout that process when you was answering that, Paul. Um, right, let's move on again. You've touched on this as well, but does the process of applying for a mortgage as a nurse differ in any way? It's that income, isn't it? You were saying.
It is, yeah,
Mm,
largely the same. Where it might differ is always going to come down to how lenders assess that income and those enhancements. So it's so common with nurses, it's obviously going to keep coming up.
mm,
But it just sort of points towards how important it is to choose the right lender because of that
mm.
situation.
Yes, yeah, that really is key, isn't it? It's so important, and probably one of the key takeaways from this
I
episode.
think so.
Mm. Okay, so this next question is interesting. What financial planning considerations should nurses keep in mind when applying for a mortgage?
Okay, so I would I would make this relatively generic and pretty straightforward for people in this situation. I would just say it's important that they think not only about what they can borrow today, but
Mm,
what a repayment's going to look like if interest rates change or your personal circumstances shift. So building some kind of, let's say, an emergency fund alongside buying a home, that's always going to be sensible.
mm.
But just budgeting for any sort of future changes that you could potentially foresee at that stage to make sure you're not going to get yourself in any sticky positions later down the line.
Definitely. Preparation is key, isn't it? We don't always think about these
Absolutely.
things, but yes, so important there.
Yeah, and that sometimes it's difficult to, we haven't got a crystal ball,
Yeah.
but if you know, for argument's sakes, you're expecting to, have children next year and you're going to be on maternity leave, having that sort of foresight with your budget can really help you.
Yes, definitely. Okay, so we're getting through our part two questions here. Let's move on to the next one. Can you explain the concept of joint nurse mortgages and how they work?
Yeah, so joint mortgage for nurses, it could mean that you're applying and you're both nurses, or it could mean that you're applying with your partner who's in a completely different profession.
Hmm.
The benefit is that lenders in that instance are obviously going to use two lots of incomes and they can combine those, and that naturally is going to increase borrowing capacity. But in another instance, if you do have slightly impaired credit and you're going on a mortgage application with someone else, if
Hmm.
their credit's really good, then that can bolster the application, and it's much more likely to be a positive outcome than if you were just using the individual slightly impaired credit as an example.
Hmm. Yes, which makes sense there. It's a useful option depending on your circumstances. Okay, so let's move on again. The next question asks, what happens if a nurse's employment circumstances change after obtaining a mortgage?
Okay, so once the mortgage is in place, the lender doesn't usually reassess that
Mm,
unless you apply to remortgage. So if you move lenders or if you want to borrow more money. Um, So if someone is going to experience a financial change and that means that they're going to struggle in any way,
mm,
it's not something that the mortgage lender would do much about unless you actually go and speak to them and explore, what sort of support they might be able to offer you in that case.
mm,
But in terms of let's say you get to the end of your 2 year fixed rate and you're worried about not being able to fix your rate in again
mm.
because your income might have gone down slightly. That's not the case. That a lender will offer you another product without having to reassess your affordability at the end of your fixed rate.
Mm. Yeah, which again, that's good news there. I feel like I'm saying that a lot on these
Yeah,
episodes.
there's
Yeah,
a lot of good news. I'm just
there
full of
is.
positivity.
It's great, isn't it? There we go. Hopefully, people feel uplifted after watching these episodes. With all that in mind, then, and just to recap, what advice would you give to nurses who are considering applying for a mortgage? Any final top tips?
I'll wrap it up with what generally tends to be the answer here, and it is that you need to speak to someone early, even
Mm,
if you're not ready to buy immediately. Getting a clear idea of the sort of borrowing potential and the steps that you need to prepare is always going to make your life easier when it comes to application time. So,
mm,
what I would say is that having a mortgage broker that can understand your income structure and your circumstances is just going to be giving you the very best outcome
mm,
for your situation. At Henchurch Lane, we deal with a lot of healthcare professionals actually. So we're quite
I
used to
see.
sort of navigating things like the shift income
Mm,
over time and those kind of complex pay structures.
mm.
Like I say, if it's not the right time now, at least you know what you're working towards.
Yes, definitely. Yep, there we go. I'm going to say it. Great news again. There we go. Um, you've demonstrated there how a mortgage broker can help. Any final thoughts, or do you think we've covered all that we can across our part one and part two episodes?
I think we've done it. I would
Mm.
like to see if
Yeah,
anyone else has got any other questions that we haven't answered, but I
yep,
think we've been
yeah,
pretty thorough there.
yeah, definitely. Thank you ever so much for that. Hopefully, that has proved useful to anyone listening to this, and I'm sure we'll be back with more soon. Thank you, Paul.
Excellent. Thank you for your time, Tessa. Bye bye.
Bye bye.